Having grown up in Texas since the age of 3, I'll admit, the spirit of America inevitably runs in my veins. However, I've also been fortunate enough to have interacted with many who have grown up in Latin America, Asia, Africa, and most recently the Middle East. Upon first interaction, I've noticed most like to break the ice by acknowledging our cultural differences. So I get questions like, where's your southern accent? Or why don't Americans use a metric system? The most popular question this past year has been, well, you guessed it, some question regarding this guy. But don't worry, my job today is not to stress this out even more, so we won't be talking politics. And since Qatar will be hosting the 2022 FIFA World Cup, I figured we could tackle the topic of soccer. I mean, not American football. It's the most popular sport in the world with over 4 billion fans worldwide. So why do you think Americans call football soccer? After all, many argue that the World Cup is globally more popular than the Olympics. Well, think about it and save your answer for the very end. And after asking this question to colleagues and friends, a lot of them would say, well, is it because Americans want nothing to do with the British, or is it because Americans suck? The most popular answer would be Americans do what they want. But let's jump back in time to the Elizabethan era, the 1500s. Back in the day, the English version of soccer or football was very chaotic. To give you an idea of how crazy it was, I'll compare it to an Italian version present at the time. It was called Calcio. Calcio allowed foul play. In brief, teams of 27 men would punch, kick, trip, tackle, and wrestle their opponents to get a ball to the goal. And pretty much the English equivalent, remember, was more chaotic than that. And so let's call this English version of the game primitive football. There are often disagreements about the rules of the game, so a lot of people favored the use of hands, others didn't. And so this actually caused a rift in the community and created 2 different games. There was rugby football, for those who favored the use of hands, and the other one, let's call it no hands football, was for those who prohibited the use of, well, you guessed it, hands. And so within the no hands football community, there are still disagreements about how the game should have been played. And so finally, in 1863, a group of teams in England finally got together, created a standard set of rules that would be used for all matches. And thus, no hands football officially became association football. Now, the British like to nickname things, and they also like to add the ending to ER to their nicknames. And so rugby back in the day was popularly called rugger. Therefore, it comes to no surprise that association football soon became a soccer. And maybe that's kind of hard to say or just really unappealing. So they soon just changed it to soccer or soccer football. So soccer is actually of European origin. And in fact, it was more commonly used before the term football was ever popular. In fact, the first ever recorded instance of the sport was referred to as soccer 18 years before the singular term football. So you might be wondering, well, why would the English call it soccer and then change it to football? So it was because of wealth. And so in the early days of association football, it was popular amongst the upper class, and the common term was soccer. However, once the sport spread amongst the middle and lower classes, the term football dominated over soccer. And thus, once this term spread throughout the world, a lot of countries already had their own popular sports that they called football, like in the United States, Australia, and Canada, to name a few. So in these countries, the term soccer was and still is preferred for this very reason. And so, in summary, America took in both forms of football, rugby and association. Rugby gained popularity and grew into American football, whereas association just remained at soccer. So that is why Americans call football soccer. When I first asked this question, what assumptions popped up into your mind? Some of us may have made assumptions based off of the idea or the stereotype that Americans can be oblivious and maybe a little bit cocky. But it just goes to show that, sometimes what we take with assumptions might not have anything to do with the topic that we're thinking about, just like in this example. And it just goes to show the power of words and how it can provoke our thought process, as well as maybe even reveal our biases. And so the next time you guys, or my challenge for you is the next time that assumption brings you to a conclusion, take it with a grain of salt and delve a little bit deeper, because you never know what you might find. Thank you.